During the tragic years under the genocidal regime, the world had many powerful nations, yet only poor and humble Vietnam had the courage to rescue the Cambodian people from complete annihilation. This affirmation was published in the newspaper of the Cambodian People's Revolutionary Party on September 26, 1989, as Vietnamese volunteer soldiers completed their international duty and returned home. These solemn lines testified to the righteousness of the war to defend the southwestern border, where Vietnam simultaneously resisted foreign invasion and saved the Cambodian people from genocide. During those years on Cambodian soil, Vietnamese volunteer soldiers upheld a pure internationalist spirit, willing to fight and sacrifice for the survival of both neighboring nations. They stood as living proof of an eternal truth. Righteousness will always triumph over cruelty. Compassion will overcome brutality, just as light conquers even the deepest darkness. On April 30th, 1975, the resistance war against the United States ended in victory. North and South were reunited, and the nation overflowed with hope for peace and reconstruction. But reality was harsh. Vietnam soon faced a brutal invasion from the Khmer Rouge, forcing the nation to once again take up arms to defend its independence and sovereignty. To understand the nature of the enemy, we must look at Pol Pot, who in 1963 became the leader of the Cambodian People's Revolutionary Party, later renamed the Communist Party of Kampuchea. After gaining power, Pol Pot embraced an extreme hostility toward Vietnam and the true Cambodian communists, beginning a long chain of bloody crimes. Pol Pot sought to build an absolute agrarian society, abolishing private property, eliminating intellectuals and religion, and destroying anyone labeled an enemy, plunging the nation into terror. At the same time, he nurtured ambitions of regional dominance, repeatedly fueling extreme nationalism and claiming many Vietnamese territories once belonged to a so-called glorious Angkor Empire. Pol Pot spread the narrative that Vietnam betrayed Cambodia in the 1954 Geneva Agreement, publishing countless accusations to incite hatred and erase the brotherly bond between the two nations. From 1970 to 1973, while Vietnam was fighting the United States, Khmer Rouge forces carried out 174 attacks, stealing food supplies and killing more than 600 Vietnamese officers and soldiers. After the 1973 Paris Agreement, the Khmer Rouge continued their propaganda campaign, accusing Vietnam of betraying the Indochinese Revolution, laying the groundwork for the bloody conflicts ahead. Despite many provocations, Vietnam persisted in seeking peaceful solutions, hoping for negotiations that would respect independence, sovereignty, and prevent unnecessary bloodshed. But those hopes soon collapsed. On May 1st, 1975, right after seizing power, the Khmer Rouge launched large-scale attacks and occupied several areas of Vietnamese territory. On May 4th, Khmer Rouge forces unexpectedly raided Phu Quoc Island. 6 days later, they attacked Tho Chu Island and executed more than 500 innocent Vietnamese civilians. Inside Cambodia, Pol Pot implemented a brutal genocidal policy, killing millions of innocent civilians under the horrific slogan, "Better to kill by mistake than to spare any enemy." Khmer Rouge regulations declared that if one person fled or resisted, their entire family across 3 generations would be executed, spreading terror throughout the land. In 1907, witnessing unimaginable atrocities, Hun Sen, then a Khmer Rouge regimental commander, fled to Vietnam, urgently pleading for help to liberate the Cambodian people. As Vietnamese volunteer forces prepared their counteroffensive, Hun Sen became a leader of the Cambodian patriotic resistance, standing side by side with Vietnam in the just war of liberation. In June 1907, the Khmer Communist Party issued a resolution declaring Vietnam the #1 enemy, stating that the war against Vietnam would be prolonged and carried out with ruthless erosion. They declared they would kill dozens of Vietnamese each day, thousands each month, and tens of thousands each year, even accepting the death of 2 million Cambodians in order to annihilate 60 million Vietnamese. From 1975 to mid-1978, the Khmer Rouge killed around 10,000 Vietnamese civilians and abducted more than 20,000 others, bringing immense suffering to the southwestern border regions. The Ba Chuk massacre in April 1978 was among the most horrific crimes, where over 3,000 civilians were slaughtered, entire families wiped out with no survivors. Beyond the killing, the Khmer Rouge destroyed infrastructure, stole livestock, burned homes, and devastated crops, forcing 500,000 Vietnamese living near the border to flee inland. The situation grew even more dangerous when China openly supported the Khmer Rouge, sending advisors, providing weapons, and increasing aid, plunging the region into deep instability. Vietnam persisted with diplomacy, but Pol Pot, China, and even the United Nations refused to respond, forcing Vietnam to prepare for an unavoidable war. On December 13, 1978, the Khmer Rouge mobilized 10 of their 19 divisions, backed by China, launching a massive offensive across the entire Vietnamese border. In the occupied areas, Khmer Rouge forces carried out genocidal policies against Vietnamese civilians, just as they had brutally murdered their own people before. Yet Vietnamese volunteer forces fought back fiercely, preventing the enemy from holding any strategic region except Ha Tien Town, and only for a very brief time. By late 1978, discovering Khmer Rouge plans to attack Tay Ninh, the Politburo, and the Central Military Commission decided to launch a historic counter-offensive along the entire border. Vietnam mobilized Army Corps 2, 3, and 4, military regions 5, 7, and 9, along with Naval Border Guard and Air Force units, all under the command of General Le Trong Ton, a brilliant strategist. At that time, the Khmer Rouge had 19 Chinese-equipped divisions, but each had only about 4,000 soldiers, severely weakened after previous clashes. On December 23, 1978, the counteroffensive officially began, marked by intense artillery strikes from Vietnamese volunteer forces across the entire southwestern border. 3 days later, the Khmer Rouge outer defense systems collapsed completely, allowing Vietnamese forces to advance deep into Cambodian territory. By the morning of December 31st, Vietnamese volunteer forces had fully reclaimed all Vietnamese lands seized by the enemy, ending the defensive phase and shifting to full counterattack. On January 4th, 1979, Vietnamese forces had secured all Cambodian territory east of the Mekong River, after a series of powerful and determined offensives. On January 6th, Vietnam launched a two-pronged pincer movement toward Phnom Penh, overcoming several fortified Khmer Rouge defensive lines. On January 7, 1979, Vietnamese volunteer forces liberated Phnom Penh, marking the fall of the Khmer Rouge regime and opening a new era of hope for the Cambodian people. After Phnom Penh was liberated, Vietnamese volunteer forces continued to pursue the remaining Khmer Rouge troops in Battambang, Ratanakiri, Stung Treng, and many northern provinces, aiming to eliminate the threat entirely. Despite facing heavy firepower, Vietnam's Army Corps 3 crossed the Mekong River, destroying major enemy strongholds and liberating vast areas, creating momentum for deeper advances. In the south, the assault units of Division 10 crossed the Tonle Sap River with more than 120 military vehicles, crushing fortified Khmer Rouge positions. Under immense pressure, Khmer Rouge leaders such as Pol Pot and Nguyen Che fled to Ko Kong province, while others escaped to Battambang or hid along the Thai border. On January 9, 1979, Vietnamese volunteer forces liberated Kampong Thom, securing Highway 6, the direct route to Phnom Penh, cutting off the enemy's retreat. At dawn on January 10th, Vietnamese forces entered Siem Reap within hours, destroying the final defensive lines and forcing the enemy into chaotic retreat. On January 11th, Vietnamese troops advanced another 100 kilometers and liberated Seray Sao Phawan near the Thai border, pushing the Khmer Rouge into complete desperation. On January 12th, Vietnam fully captured Battambang, the Khmer Rouge's major stronghold, forcing the remaining troops to split into small groups and flee into dense forests. In the southern battlefield, Vietnamese volunteer forces advanced from An Giang in two major directions, striking at southwestern Cambodia, where the Khmer Rouge still concentrated large units. Division 325 shattered enemy defensive lines at Takeo, while Division 8 under General Nguyen Huan launched a direct assault on Kampong Troc, applying pressure from the southeast. At sea, Vietnam's Navy bombarded Khmer Rouge bases from Phu Quoc, supporting commando units landing at the foot of Mount Bokor, though they later withdrew due to rising tides. Despite harsh terrain and combat conditions, Vietnamese volunteer forces secured Kampot Port and Ream Naval Base, eliminating remaining Khmer Rouge units in the area. In the northwest, Military Region 9 launched a direct attack on Takeo Town, a heavily fortified position, yet the Khmer Rouge were still driven out after bold and decisive assaults. Vietnamese forces not only captured Kampong Spo, but also opened a crucial corridor, allowing volunteer units to merge and encircle the Khmer Rouge completely. By January 1979, the counteroffensive ended in a glorious victory. Vietnam and Cambodian revolutionary forces crushed 18 Khmer Rouge divisions in less than a month. Statistics show that 12,000 enemy troops were killed, 8,800 captured alive, 3,200 surrendered, and 44,000 fled, saving more than 4 million Cambodians from genocide. All Khmer Rouge equipment and military infrastructure were seized, collapsing the brutal regime and bringing new hope to Cambodia and stability to the Indochina region. However, remaining Khmer Rouge forces hid along the Thai border, continuing sporadic attacks that caused casualties among Vietnamese troops, forcing additional sweep operations. After liberating Phnom Penh Army, Corps 3 Military Region 7 and Military Region 9 immediately crossed the Mekong River, securing all areas north of Tonle Sap and key strategic routes. On January 9th, Vietnamese volunteer forces liberated Kampong Thom, again cutting the strategic line between northern Cambodia and Phnom Penh, rapidly weakening the Khmer Rouge. Ordered to liberate Siem Reap Regiment 66 of Army Corps 3 moved with 36 transport vehicles supported by tanks, covering 100 kilometers in just 2 hours. On January 10th, Siem Reap was completely liberated. Khmer Rouge troops fled in panic, abandoning ammunition depots and military supplies they could not destroy in time. The next day, Vietnamese troops advanced another 100 kilometers to liberate Seray Sao Phawan, placing the entire western region of Cambodia under Vietnamese control. On January 12th, Battambang, the Khmer Rouge's massive base, fell, forcing their remnants to split up, hide in jungles, and revert to guerrilla tactics. On January 13th, the headquarters of Army Corps 4 reached Battambang to direct operations. But on January 16th, General Kim Tuan was ambushed and heroically sacrificed, a profound national loss. Carrying forward his spirit, Army Corps 3 continued its mission in Cambodia until June 1979, before returning to defend Vietnam's northern border against the Chinese invasion. A fierce battle erupted at Kampong Spo, where Division 339 held its positions. Despite desperate Khmer Rouge counterattacks, they were repelled after 17 days of relentless fighting. Victory at Kampong Spo secured Highway 4, confirming Vietnam's battlefield superiority and ensuring the strategic corridor between Phnom Penh and the southern provinces. Vietnamese main force divisions then captured Am Liang, the new headquarters of Pol Pot. Despite harsh terrain, Vietnamese troops took full control of the battlefield. After Am Vietnamese forces launched an assault on Leech Base, the last major Khmer Rouge supply center surrounding it from four directions to destroy it completely. From the North Division, 341 attacked the main defensive line, while Division 2 struck from the east, Military Region 9 from the south, and Division 31 from the west. The battle lasted more than a month due to desperate enemy resistance, but Leech Base finally fell on April 29, 1979, marking the complete collapse of the stronghold. After the defeat, Khmer Rouge remnants fled to hideouts along the Thai border or deep in the forests, shifting to guerrilla warfare and destabilizing regional security. By March 1979, Vietnamese volunteer forces attacked Ta Son, the Khmer Rouge's final base in southern Thailand, forcing them to flee and abandon vast stores of documents and weapons. After victory, Vietnamese forces were assigned stabilization missions, rotating units sending heavily damaged regiments home while fresh forces continued their international duties. Despite the resounding victory, Vietnam suffered heavy losses, with more than 8,000 soldiers sacrificing their lives. Army Corps 4 alone lost over 3,000 brave men during the campaign. Despite immense sacrifice, Vietnam was misunderstood and condemned internationally, even sanctioned by the United Nations in 1985, causing prolonged political and economic hardship. Yet the Cambodian people always remembered Vietnam's help, calling Vietnamese soldiers the Buddhist Army, a title of deep reverence for those who brought them life instead of death. Throughout their international mission, Vietnamese volunteer forces helped millions of Cambodians return home, rebuild farms, restore schools, temples, and essential public structures. The war to defend the southwestern border proved Vietnam's selfless international spirit, protecting national sovereignty, rescuing Cambodia from genocide, and preserving peace in the region.